Directing a film is among the hardest things to do. You have to build credibility, trust, funding, form a creative team to back you, and so many more things go along with filmmaking. Finn Wolfhard and Billy Brick are so young. I mean, these dudes are 22 and 25 years old respectively, so it's honestly unbelievable that they are able to make a movie, something most people won't ever get to say. It's inspiring even that they got to make a movie at such a young age. I mean, so few ever get to say they had a solid directorial debut, and even less at that age. I mean, that's why Steven Spielberg is legendary, because what, that dude was 26 when he made Jaws? That's ridiculous. But there are issues that surface heavily because of their inexperience. I mean, even Finn has said how this thing struggled to get off the ground because investors deemed them too young directors and they were just too unreliable. The film was made in 2023 and just now is getting its theatrical release, which just speaks volumes of how turbulent the journey was for this movie. Finn Wolfhard is an excellent actor. I mean, obviously he's huge from Stranger Things, and he did fantastic in It 2017. And along with Billy Brick as co-director, Hell of a Summer is basically a love letter to 80s slashers with an injection of modern personalities and stereotypes. Everyone on board knows their shit about the genre, the extensive tropes, and most importantly, what makes us love those tropes and moments so much that we constantly see on screen. And I think hands down, the greatest strength of the film is that it feels like a summer camp. This was shot in the French countryside, and it shows. So much good B-roll and location setting that it makes it feel like this isn't just a set. And honestly, it did it better than most of the Friday films, so I really do appreciate the attention to the atmosphere. We got to see multiple bonfires, the rec hall, the open lunch area, the dock. It was all really good additions. And I think that the first act is the strongest of the film, because on top of the setting, these characters actually feel like counselors that are catching up after a year of not seeing each other, or having plans on what they're gonna do for the remainder of the time, and they're just generally horny. Like, it's all good stuff. And on the topic of the counselors, while the story itself underwhelmed tremendously, some of the performances were actually fine. Demi and Claire in particular, and I think Jason played a great Crispin Glover stand-in from Friday 4, and not in an obnoxious way. He's just generally so sweet, and while he constantly acquiesces to all the other counselors, he always stays true to what he feels, and I really like that about him. Even if it meant we had to keep listening to that stupid runner of him being camp leader and everybody telling him, no he's not. And this movie isn't that deep. Outside of the generational clash between Gen Alpha and other generations, this is a pretty straightforward story, and that's perfectly fine. In some way, I like that Jason kinda represents all of us that were met with reality and had to accept the idea of adulting, and it just touches on the struggle people face of letting go of that inner child in them. We can't decide when we have to do this thing called adulting.
How many summers does a guy get to spend here?
A lot, apparently.
I like that to contrast the 80s norm of having a final girl, outside of Ash of course, Jason is the final boy in this scenario, where he's finding the bodies, nobody's listening to him, and even gets rescued like they did back then. He wasn't the hero, and he really wasn't meant to be. You could tell the movie knew that that wasn't what they were trying to do with Jason. And lastly, I do appreciate that we got a proper use of a bow and arrow in this movie. It's just always so exciting to see, and I was worried that we were just gonna get a runner of using that bow and arrow throughout the movie, and then we weren't gonna get a payoff for it, but we did at the end. But the film is absolutely riddled with issues, sadly. It just gets muddied up by the fact that while all the tropes and clear love for the genre are there, there's no originality in there. It's great to show love for the genre, but it works so much better when you do it in a new creative way to showcase that trope. Otherwise, it just feels like another drop in a bucket just because it gets lost in the tons of movies that it derives from. This film is so clear in its influences, but it's like you didn't understand what made that iconic. It should primarily have an original concept and then implement those tropes into the concept. What made Sleepaway Camp so amazing is that it saw Friday the 13th and said, yeah, but let's make it an actual camp with actual kids. The pinnacle example being Scream, that it saw the genre as a whole and the state that it was in for the past 2 decades and said, yeah, but let's blend that all together and let's make it meta. And like those, there are so many movies that understand how to creatively embed nostalgic undertones into new concepts. The film just stays stagnant and doesn't grow or evolve any further than just saying, I love the genre and you should too. Also, while the tone of the film is honestly fairly consistent throughout the entire runtime, the marketing was a huge letdown for this movie. This was marketed as a horror comedy, but this is literally like 95% comedy and like 5% horror. And that's a huge bummer because it teetered into parody territory, which I have to imagine it was not the goal of the movie.
The line's been cut. Oh, I thought
always want to say that.
Bodies had a similar tone, and yet it felt like a much more complete story, and the balance was handled much better. Not to mention that it was frustrating to see that this was rated R, and with how much stuff happened off screen, with the exception of one actual good effects sequence, this is basically PG-13, and it wasted its opportunity. And that's literally one of the biggest takeaways of the 80s, the gore and the practical effects, yet it was so sparse here. And while I guess it stayed painfully faithful to 80s having bad character decisions and just dumb moments, this movie somehow highlighted those moments even more. For like 80% of the nighttime portion of the movie, it's so dark and nobody tries to turn on the lights, even though we're never explicitly told that the power was cut. There's literally a scene where Claire is right next to a light switch and she chooses not to try and turn it on. No one has flashlights until they randomly do, and then they end up losing them, I guess, so it basically makes it pointless. Watching this movie makes it feel like there's missing scenes, but they were cut because they needed to be under the 90-minute threshold. When the bodies start being revealed, and then the bodies go missing, and nobody questions where the bodies went, and then they're revealed to actually still be alive, and nobody questions where were you, how did all that blood get there if you weren't actually hurt, what were you doing all that time, I start to worry about the writing. So overall, this movie just felt like a disappointment, and it sucks because I really did want to love this movie. Hopefully Finn can do better next time because the intention was certainly there. But that's it for me. I'd appreciate a thumbs up, subscribe, and sincerely yours, Anthony.